Here's something that's going to sound completely backwards. Believing in yourself has almost nothing to do with confidence. In fact, most of what you've been taught about self-belief is quietly working against you. You've been told to think positive, to fake it until you make it, to repeat affirmations in the mirror until the words finally stick. And yet, somehow, after years of trying, that hollow feeling is still there. That quiet suspicion that if people really saw you, the real you, they'd walk away. So let's say something unpopular right from the start. You don't lack confidence because you haven't tried hard enough. You lack it because you've spent your entire life paying a debt nobody ever showed you the bill for, an invisible price for approval, charged every time you shrank yourself to be accepted. This isn't another video about loving yourself more. This is about something far less comfortable and far more honest. The rooms you built out of fear. The ambition you locked away because it once felt dangerous to show it. The body that's been trying to tell you the truth for years while your mind refused to listen. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why the people closest to you might resist you the moment you start changing, and why that resistance is actually proof that something real is finally happening. You'll learn the one question that quietly replaces the exhausting need for approval. A question so simple, most people never think to ask it, yet powerful enough to end years of seeking validation in all the wrong places. Because here's the paradox nobody warns you about. The moment you genuinely start believing in yourself, not everyone will celebrate it. Some people will. But others, the ones who got comfortable with your smallness, will quietly step back, confused, almost offended, as if you broke a rule nobody ever wrote down. And that's exactly where real transformation begins. So stay with us, because what you're about to hear isn't motivation. It's a complete rewiring of the question you've been asking your entire life. There's a quiet transaction happening inside you every single day, and you've probably never noticed it. Every time you shrink yourself to be accepted, every time you swallow your real opinion to keep the peace, every time you laugh at a joke that actually hurt, you're making a withdrawal. Not from your bank account, but from something far more fragile, your sense of self-worth. Think of it like a psychological bank account. Nobody ever shows you the statement, but the balance is real, and it's being drained in silence, transaction by transaction, until one day you wake up emotionally bankrupt and you don't even know why. This is the hidden cost of seeking approval instead of trusting yourself. And it's the very first wall standing between you and genuine self-belief. Here's the thing nobody tells you. Self-belief isn't built by collecting more approval. It's built by stopping the withdrawals. Picture a man who spends 15 years agreeing with his boss just to avoid conflict, nodding along in meetings even when his gut is screaming the opposite. Each nod is a debit. Each silence is a debit. By the time he's 40, he doesn't recognize his own voice anymore. He's spent it all trying to be liked. That's not humility. That's bankruptcy disguised as kindness. And the tricky part is, society applauds this kind of bankruptcy. It calls it being easy to work with, being agreeable, being low maintenance. But deep down, in that quiet hour before sleep, something in him knows the account is empty. So how do you stop the bleeding? You start by tracking your own transactions, and this is something you can actually practice today. Next time you're about to agree with something you don't believe, just to keep the room comfortable, pause for 3 seconds. That pause is where self-trust is rebuilt. Carl Jung once pointed to something profound here. The psyche doesn't punish you for asserting truth, it punishes you for abandoning it. If you want a concrete exercise, try journaling one moment each night where you stayed silent out of fear instead of speaking out of conviction. Within 30 days, you'll start to see the pattern. And patterns, once seen, lose their grip. This single habit, simple as it sounds, is often the first real deposit a person makes into their own sense of worth in years. But there's a deeper question hiding underneath all of this, one most people never stop to ask. If approval is the currency you've been spending your whole life, who, exactly, set the exchange rate? Who decided that your opinion was worth less than someone else's comfort? Because once you start asking that question, you start to notice something unsettling. The people who taught you to pay this price were often paying it themselves to someone else, a generation before you were even born. Picture, for a moment, a house. Not the house you live in, the one you built inside yourself, brick by brick, starting somewhere back in childhood, long before you had any say in the blueprint. This house has a name, and psychology calls it the persona. It's the version of you the world gets to see, carefully designed, room by room, to keep you safe from rejection. And here's the part most people never realize. Every single room in that house was built in response to fear, not in response to truth. The room of self-deprecating humor, where you learn to mock yourself before anyone else could. The room of over-explaining, where you justify every decision before someone has even questioned it. The room of I'm fine, where you store every feeling too inconvenient to express out loud. The problem isn't that this house exists. Everyone has one. It's a survival structure, and there's nothing shameful about needing shelter. The problem is when you forget you built it and start believing the house is actually you. Think of a woman who spent her whole career being the funny one in every meeting, deflecting tension with a joke. Because as a kid, laughter was the only thing that made an unpredictable parent calm down. Decades later, she still can't take a compliment seriously, still can't sit in silence without filling it with self-deprecating commentary. Not because that's who she is, but because that's the room she learned to live in. Real self-belief begins the moment you can walk through your own house and recognize this hallway was fear, this room was protection, and none of it was ever the whole truth of who I am. So how do you start mapping your own house? Try this exercise tonight. Write down 3 traits people consistently praise you for, maybe easygoing, low-key, always positive. Now ask yourself, honestly, which fear built that room? Is easygoing really your nature, or is it the trained response of a child who learned that needs created conflict? This isn't about tearing the house down overnight. That would be reckless, even dangerous. It's about slowly adding windows, letting light into rooms you've kept curtained for years. Jung called this process individuation, the long, sometimes uncomfortable work of separating who you authentically are from the character you were forced to construct just to survive your environment. And here's where it gets genuinely strange. Almost unsettling if you sit with it long enough. The moment you start renovating this house, saying the honest thing instead of the funny thing, sitting in silence instead of over-explaining, the people closest to you may not clap. Some of them might actually step back, confused, even irritated, as if you'd broken some rule nobody ever wrote down out loud. Every relationship you've ever had carries an invisible contract, one nobody ever read out loud, nobody ever signed with ink. And yet everyone involved somehow agreed to its terms. This contract defines who apologizes first, who stays quiet during disagreements, who plays the strong one, who plays the fragile one. And for years, it works just fine, because both sides know their lines. But here's what almost nobody warns you about. The moment you start genuinely believing in yourself, setting a boundary you never used to set, saying no without over-explaining, taking up space you used to apologize for, you are, without ever announcing it, attempting to terminate that contract. And contracts, even invisible ones, don't end quietly. Think about a friend who always called you for advice never the other way around, because somewhere along the line, your role became the listener, and theirs became the one who needs listening to. For 10 years, that arrangement felt like friendship. But the day you finally say, "Actually, I'm struggling too. Can you listen to me for once?" Watch what happens. Some friends will lean in, grateful for the chance to finally show up for you. But others will go cold, distant, almost offended, as if you'd broken a rule that was never written but was somehow sacred to them. That coldness isn't really about you. It's about the role you stopped playing. A role they depended on more than they ever admitted, even to themselves. This is why self-belief is rarely celebrated by everyone around you, even though it should be. The people who loved your old insecurity, your constant need for reassurance, your habit of shrinking first, built their own comfort on top of your smallness. When you grow, you're not just changing yourself, you're quietly renegotiating every relationship attached to the old version of you. A practical exercise here: the next time someone reacts strangely to a new boundary you've set, instead of immediately apologizing or backing down, ask yourself one question. Was I actually doing something wrong? Or did I simply stop playing my old part in their script? That single question, asked honestly, can save you years of unnecessary guilt. And this is where things get uncomfortable in a way few people are prepared for. Believing in yourself doesn't just cost you approval from strangers. Sometimes it costs you the people who were closest to you, the ones who knew exactly how to love the smaller, more apologetic version of who you used to be. Most people think the shadow is the dark, shameful part of themselves, the anger, the jealousy, the impulses they'd rather not admit to. And yes, that's part of it. But Carl Jung pointed to something far less comfortable, something almost nobody talks about. The shadow also contains your ambition, your intelligence, your desire to be seen, to take up more room in the world than you currently allow yourself. Why would you hide something good? Because somewhere along the way, showing it cost you. Maybe a sibling got punished for being too much. Maybe a parent felt threatened by a child who was smarter, louder, more capable than them. So you learned, quietly, almost without noticing, to put the most valuable parts of yourself away. Not because they were ugly, but because they were dangerous to display. Picture an attic in an old house, the kind with a door that sticks and a lock nobody remembers the key to. Most people imagine that attic is full of monsters. But what if, instead, it's full of furniture, beautiful, expensive furniture, locked away not because it's frightening, but because someone once broke a piece just like it, and you decided it was safer never to bring it back downstairs? That's your ambition up there. That's your unapologetic intelligence. That's the version of you who speaks up in meetings without softening every sentence with 3 apologies first. It's not feared because it's evil. It's feared because it's powerful. And somewhere along the line, power got punished. So how do you start unlocking that attic? Begin small. Think of one thing you're genuinely good at, something you instinctively downplay the moment someone compliments you on it. Maybe it's your writing, your strategic mind, your ability to make people feel at ease. Next time, instead of deflecting with "oh, it's nothing," try simply saying "thank you. I worked hard on that." That sentence alone will feel uncomfortable the first few times. That discomfort is the dust of a room that hasn't been opened in years. Carl Jung's core insight here is almost a paradox. You don't grow by chasing the light. You grow by going back into the rooms you sealed off and bringing the furniture back downstairs, one piece at a time. But here's the unsettling part. The part that explains so much about why some people sabotage their own success right when it starts to arrive. If your ambition was once dangerous to display, some part of you may still believe that succeeding now will cost you the same way it cost you back then. Here's something most people never connect: that chronic tightness in your chest, that exhaustion no amount of sleep seems to fix, that low hum of anxiety that follows you into rooms where nothing is actually wrong, none of it is random. The body has a strange kind of honesty the mind doesn't always have access to. When you spend years ignoring your own needs, suppressing your real opinions, locking away your ambition in that attic we just talked about, the mind might successfully forget. But the body never does. It keeps a record, quietly, in muscle tension, in shallow breathing, in a stomach that knots before certain phone calls. This is what psychologists call the psychosomatic signal, the abandoned self. Unable to speak through words, finding another language entirely. Plus, think of the body as a messenger who never stops delivering letters, even when the mind keeps refusing to open them. A man ignores every signal that his job is slowly hollowing him out. He keeps showing up, keeps smiling, keeps saying "I'm fine" at dinner, until one day his body delivers the final letter in a language impossible to ignore. A panic attack in a parking lot. A sudden collapse of energy that no doctor can fully explain through blood work alone. That's not weakness. That's the body, finally, refusing to be the only one carrying a truth the mind abandoned years ago. If you've ever felt unexplainable fatigue around certain people, or a strange tightness before specific conversations, that's not nothing. That's information, and it deserves your attention rather than your dismissal. So what do you actually do with this information? Start small. Start practical. The next time your body reacts strongly before a conversation, a racing heart before confronting someone, a tight jaw before a meeting where you know you'll have to speak up, don't override it with caffeine or distraction. Pause and ask, what is this trying to tell me that I haven't let myself think in words yet? Books like The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk go deep into this exact mechanism, and even just 20 minutes of daily breathwork or somatic stretching can begin to loosen what years of suppression have tightened. This isn't mysticism. It's simply listening to a messenger you've been leaving unanswered for far too long. And once you start listening, something curious happens. The very same body that once betrayed you with anxiety becomes the most honest compass you have. Because if the body protests this loudly when you abandon yourself, imagine what it might be trying to protect you from the moment you finally start abandoning everyone else's expectations instead. There's a version of kindness the world applauds loudly, and there's a version of kindness that quietly erases a person year after year without anyone, including the person themselves, noticing it happening. The difference isn't in the act of giving, it's in the absence of a border around that giving. When you say yes to everything, when you absorb everyone's emotional weight without ever asking anyone to absorb yours, you're not being generous, you're becoming infrastructure. And infrastructure, by definition, doesn't get thanked. Nobody thanks the road for holding the weight of every car that drives over it. The road is just expected to be there, silent, sturdy, available, forever. Think of a woman who became the strong one in her family at 13, after a parent's illness rearranged everyone's roles overnight. Decades later, she's still the one everyone calls at 2 a.m., still the one who shows up with food when someone's grieving, still the one nobody thinks to check on because she trained everyone, without meaning to, that she doesn't need checking on. That's not a personality trait. That's a role she was assigned once, in crisis, that calcified into an identity. And the cruelest part is that the people around her aren't villains, they simply learned, accurately, based on years of evidence, that she'll absorb the weight no matter what. You cannot blame water for flowing toward the lowest point, and you cannot blame people for leaning on the person who never says she's tired. So how do you start rebuilding a border without becoming cold or bitter in the process? Start with one small, almost laughably simple practice. The next time someone asks for a favor that genuinely costs you something, your time, your energy, your peace, pause before answering and say, "Let me think about it and get back to you," instead of the automatic yes. That single pause breaks a pattern that may have run unquestioned for 20 years. It's not selfish. It's the first stone in rebuilding a structure that has a shape, instead of one that simply absorbs whatever gets poured onto it. True kindness, the kind that doesn't quietly destroy the person practicing it, always has edges. And here's the question almost nobody asks before it's too late. If you disappeared tomorrow, not died, just stopped being available, how many of the people currently leaning on you would actually check if you were okay versus simply finding someone else to lean on instead? There's a moment that arrives for everyone who starts genuinely believing in themselves, and it's not a triumphant moment, it's an uncomfortable one. It's the moment someone criticizes you, maybe fairly, maybe unfairly, and you have to decide in real time who you're going to listen to, the voice of your own clarity or the noise of someone else's opinion. Most people think self-confidence means criticism stops hurting. That's a myth, and a dangerous one, because it sets you up to believe something is wrong with you the moment you feel that familiar sting. The truth is, far more honest, real self-belief doesn't mean the words don't land. It means you finally know where your worth is coming from, so the words don't get to decide your worth for you. Picture two trees standing in the exact same storm. One has shallow roots, it grew fast, reaching for sunlight, but never had to dig deep because the soil around it was soft and easy. When the wind comes, that tree shakes violently, branches thrashing, because its entire structure is fighting to avoid falling. The other tree has spent years pushing roots down into rock, slowly, sometimes painfully, through soil that didn't make it easy. When the same wind arrives, that tree also moves, branches bending, leaves rustling, but it never once fears falling, because its stability was never about the absence of wind. It was about where its roots had gone, quietly, underground, long before the storm arrived. This is the entire difference between ego and alignment. Ego is the shallow-rooted tree, dependent on calm weather, on universal agreement, on everyone nodding along to feel safe. Alignment is the deep-rooted tree, which can hear "I disagree with you," or even "I think you're wrong," without that sentence becoming a referendum on its entire worth. A practical way to build this, next time you receive criticism, before reacting, ask yourself one separating question. Is this person attacking who I am, or are they questioning something I did? Those are almost never the same thing, even though our nervous system processes them identically in the first 3 seconds. Carl Jung's concept of individuation is, at its core, exactly this kind of root deepening, slow, often uncomfortable, entirely necessary. But here's what nobody warns you about deep-rooted trees. The deeper your roots go, the less you need everyone to agree with you to feel safe standing, and that single shift, subtle as it sounds, is precisely what starts costing you relationships built entirely on your old need for consensus. Here's something that rarely gets said out loud, even though it explains so much. Some of the fear holding you back from believing in yourself was never actually yours to begin with. Carl Jung described something he called the unlived life of the parent. The idea that whatever a parent suppressed, avoided, or never dared to become often gets passed down to the child, not as a story, but as an atmosphere. A feeling in the house, a tone of voice whenever ambition came up at the dinner table. You didn't inherit a fear of failure because you personally failed catastrophically as a child. You inherited it because somewhere in your family line, Someone tried, got hurt, and decided, quietly, without ever announcing it, that wanting too much wasn't safe. Picture a backpack passed from parent to child, generation after generation, where each person adds one more stone before handing it over. But nobody ever takes a stone out. A grandmother who never finished school because of circumstances she didn't choose adds a stone of, don't expect too much from life. A father who watched his own ambition crushed in a job he hated adds a stone of, just be grateful you have stable work. By the time the backpack reaches you, it's heavy with limitations that were never actually about your own life. They were survival strategies for a completely different time, a completely different set of circumstances that simply never got unpacked. So how do you start telling the difference between your own fear and an inherited one? Try this. The next time you feel an intense, almost disproportionate fear about pursuing something, starting a business, asking for a raise, leaving a relationship that's comfortable but empty, ask yourself, whose voice is this, really? Sometimes you'll recognize a parent's exact words, word for word, in your own internal monologue. That recognition alone is powerful, because once you can name a stone as not mine, you gain the right to finally set it down. This doesn't mean blaming your parents. Most of them were carrying backpacks handed to them too, doing the best they could with the weight they'd received. And this is where the real work begins, the part most people never get to. Once you start setting down stones that were never yours, you have to ask an even harder question. If this fear wasn't mine, then who, underneath all this inherited weight, was I actually supposed to become? Most people imagine that becoming yourself is supposed to feel like winning. They picture a triumphant moment, finally confident, finally free, finally whole, like crossing a finish line to applause. Nobody warns you about the part that comes first, the grieving. Because individuation, the lifelong process Carl Jung described of becoming who you authentically are, doesn't happen by adding something new. It happens by losing something old, the persona you spent decades perfecting, the role your family depended on, the version of you that made everyone else comfortable. And you cannot lose something you built your entire identity around without feeling something very close to mourning, even if what you're losing was never truly serving you. Think of it as a quiet funeral, one nobody else attends, one nobody else even knows is happening. The easygoing friend who never causes problems dies. The employee who never pushes back dies. The child who never disappoints dies. Nobody sends flowers, because nobody else witnessed these identities as separate from you. To them, that was simply who you were. But you know. You feel the absence in quiet moments, a strange hollowness that confuses you, because you're finally doing the thing you wanted, setting boundaries, pursuing the real ambition, speaking the honest truth. And yet some nights, you feel an inexplicable sadness underneath the progress. That sadness isn't a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're doing something real. This is exactly why so many people quietly sabotage their own growth right when it starts working, not because they're afraid of failure, but because grief is uncomfortable, and humans will often choose familiar pain over unfamiliar loss, even when the unfamiliar loss leads somewhere better. A practical way through this: when you notice that unexplained heaviness after a moment of real growth, finally leaving a job that drained you, finally being honest with someone you'd always pleased, don't rush to feel happy about it. Let yourself name it plainly. I am grieving who I used to be, and that's allowed. Books on grief, like It's Okay That You're Not Okay by Megan Devine, even though written about loss in general, apply with startling precision to this exact kind of internal death. And once you let yourself grieve properly, instead of rushing past it in search of instant triumph, something shifts. Because on the other side of that funeral isn't just freedom, it's a much quieter, much harder question that's been waiting underneath everything this whole time. For most of your life, there's been one question running quietly underneath almost every decision you've made. Even the small ones: what to wear, what to say, what to post, what to stay silent about. The question is simple, and it's exhausting. Will I be accepted? It shaped the job you took, the opinions you softened, the rooms you stayed small in. And here's the uncomfortable truth nobody tells you early enough. That question has no finish line. You can win the approval of an entire room and still feel that same hollow ache the next morning. Because the question itself was never designed to be satisfied, only repeated endlessly, room after room, person after person, for the rest of your life. So, what replaces it? Not a louder voice demanding everyone like you. Something quieter and far more durable. Can I look at myself in the mirror? Not the mirror that reflects how others see you, the one that's been doing all the work this whole time, the one you've spent years polishing for an audience. A different mirror. One that doesn't ask, did they approve? But asks, did I act like the person I actually respect? Picture a man finally turning down money he didn't earn honestly, even though no one would have known the difference. Nobody applauds that moment. There's no audience. But he sleeps that night the way people sleep when the inner mirror and the outer behavior finally match. This shift, small as it sounds, changes almost everything. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head, trying to predict what will make someone like you. You stop shrinking before you've even tested whether shrinking was necessary. A simple daily practice. At the end of each day, instead of asking, did people enjoy me today, ask, did I show up as someone I actually respect today? Some days the answer will be no, and that's fine. That's just information, not failure. Carl Jung spent his whole life pointing toward this exact destination, not perfection, not universal approval, but wholeness, becoming someone whose insides and outsides finally tell the same story. And that, in the end, is the entire journey we've walked through together. The invisible debts, the rooms you built out of fear, the attic full of buried ambition, the body that never stopped speaking, the inherited weight, the deep roots, the quiet grief, all of it leading to this single, simple act, looking in the mirror, and finally, for the first time in years, recognizing exactly who's looking back. So here's the real question now that you've heard all of this. Which room in your house are you still decorating out of fear instead of truth? Which stone in that inherited backpack have you been carrying your whole life, believing it was yours when it never actually belonged to you? Believing in yourself was never about feeling unstoppable every single morning. It was about finally asking a different question than the one you've been asking your whole life. Not will I be accepted, but can I look at myself in the mirror and recognize someone I actually respect? Tonight, before you fall asleep, try just one thing. Think of a single moment today where you shrank, where you softened a truth, where you said yes when something in you wanted to say no. Don't judge it, just name it. That's the first deposit back into an account you've been draining for years without realizing it. Self-belief isn't built in some dramatic, cinematic moment of revelation. It's built in these small, almost invisible decisions, repeated quietly, day after day, until one day you notice the shaking has stopped, and the roots have gone deep enough to hold you steady through any storm. If something in this video touched a part of you that's been waiting years to be named, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep walking this path with us, because individuation, the slow becoming of who you truly are, isn't a single video, it's a journey, and there's so much more waiting to be uncovered together.